Loss does not merely take something away, it strips away illusions that once kept the inner world comfortably concealed. In the presence of another person, especially one who reaches deeply into us, we often remain partially unaware of ourselves. Certain emotions, strengths, fears, and desires lie dormant, only stirred into life through connection. When that connection disappears, what remains is not emptiness alone, but a sudden and often unsettling clarity. It is as if a veil has been lifted, exposing aspects of the self that had quietly existed beneath the surface all along. In their presence, parts of you were expressed without effort. You did not have to search for meaning. It unfolded naturally, in shared moments, in glances, in the subtle recognition of being understood. But when they are gone, those same parts do not vanish with them. Instead, they linger, unanchored, seeking direction, demanding acknowledgement. This is where loss begins its deeper work. It forces an encounter with what was once projected outward. The human psyche has a tendency to distribute itself. Qualities we struggle to recognize within ourselves are often perceived more easily in others. Strength is admired in them, while it quietly belongs to us. Warmth feels like something they give, when in truth it is something we are capable of generating. Meaning appears to come from their presence, yet it is our own depth responding to the connection. When they are no longer there, the illusion of external origin collapses, and what was once attributed to them must now be faced as part of oneself. This confrontation is rarely comfortable. Without the familiar presence that once held these qualities in place, there is a sense of disorientation. The world feels altered, not because reality itself has changed, but because perception has shifted inward. Silence becomes louder, emotions become more defined. There is no longer a distraction from what lies within. In this space, one begins to notice patterns, dependencies, and unexamined needs that were previously masked by the relationship. Loss, in this sense, acts as a mirror turned inward. It reflects not only what has been lost, but what has been hidden. It reveals how much of one's identity was intertwined with another, and how much remains unclaimed. The absence creates a tension, a pull toward understanding, toward integration. What was once experienced externally must now be recognized as an internal reality. Some resist this process. They attempt to fill the void quickly, to replace what is missing without examining what has been revealed. But the underlying tension persists, because it does not originate from the absence itself. It comes from the incomplete recognition of the self. Until that recognition takes place, the feeling of lack continues, regardless of what or who enters their life. Others begin to sense that the pain carries meaning, that beneath the discomfort lies an invitation to become aware of something essential. The qualities once seen in the other person are gradually reclaimed. Strength becomes personal, warmth becomes self-generated, meaning begins to arise from within rather than being dependent on external presence. This process is slow, often uneven, and filled with moments of doubt, but it marks the beginning of a shift from unconscious reliance to conscious ownership. In this way, loss becomes more than an event. It becomes a revelation. It exposes the architecture of the inner world, showing both its fragility and its potential. What once seemed like emptiness is understood as unrecognized depth waiting to be explored, understood, and ultimately integrated into a more whole and conscious sense of self. When someone loses you, the absence is not limited to your physical presence or the moments you once shared. What disappears with you is something far less visible, yet far more significant, a version of themselves that only existed in relation to you. Human identity is not fixed or singular. It is fluid, shaped and reshaped through connection. In the presence of certain people, aspects of the self emerge that remain otherwise inaccessible. These aspects are not illusions, nor are they borrowed traits. They are real, but they require a specific relational space to come into being. With you, they were not entirely the same person they are with others. There was a particular way they spoke, a certain openness they allowed, a subtle alignment of thoughts and emotions that felt natural and unforced. It was not something they consciously constructed. It unfolded spontaneously, as if your presence unlocked a configuration within them that had always existed in potential but had never been fully realized. In that space, they may have felt more alive, more understood, or more capable of expressing parts of themselves they usually kept hidden. When you are gone, that version of them does not simply transfer elsewhere. It cannot be easily recreated, because it was not built on effort or imitation. It was born from a unique dynamic, a meeting point between two inner worlds that cannot be duplicated by replacing one of the participants. This is why loss feels disorienting, in a way that is difficult to articulate. It is not just that they miss you, it is that they no longer recognize themselves in the same way. They may notice that certain reactions no longer arise as they once did. Conversations feel flatter, less meaningful, even when they try to engage as before. The ease that once defined their interactions is replaced by a kind of effort, as though they are attempting to reconstruct something that no longer comes naturally. This creates a subtle but persistent sense of fragmentation. They are still themselves, but not entirely. Something has receded, leaving behind an awareness of what is missing without a clear understanding of how to restore it. This experience often leads to confusion. They may believe that what they lost was entirely external, that it was you who carried the meaning, the depth, the sense of vitality. But beneath that assumption lies a more complex truth. What they experienced in your presence was a reflection of their own inner capacity, brought into awareness through the connection you shared. The version of themselves they miss is not something you gave them. It is something that emerged within them because of you. Without you, they are left with the task of confronting that realization. The qualities they associate with that lost version, whether it is vulnerability, strength, warmth, or authenticity, do not disappear. They remain, but without the relational context that once sustained them, they feel distant, inaccessible. The challenge then becomes one of recognition, understanding that what feels lost is not entirely gone, but rather unanchored. This unanchored state creates a tension between memory and present experience. They remember who they were with you, and that memory stands in contrast to who they feel they are now. It can create a longing not only for your return, but for the return of that version of themselves. Yet the path forward does not lie in recreating the past, because the past was never a fixed structure. It was a living interaction, constantly shaped by both of you. To move beyond this, they must begin to see that the version of themselves they associate with you is not confined to that relationship. It is a part of their psyche that has been revealed, but not yet fully integrated. The loss then becomes an invitation, though not one that is easily accepted, to reclaim that version consciously, rather than experiencing it only through another person. Absence does not create emptiness in the simple sense of something missing. It creates a space that begins to speak. When someone is present, their existence fills certain psychological gaps so seamlessly that those gaps are never noticed. Their voice, their attention, their mere being acts as a kind of quiet occupation of inner territory. It prevents certain questions from arising, certain feelings from surfacing, certain truths from becoming visible. But when they are no longer there, that occupied space does not disappear. It remains, but now it is unfilled, and in that unfilled state, it begins to demand awareness. This is where confrontation begins, not with the other person, but with oneself. The absence removes the distraction of interaction, leaving behind a kind of silence that is not peaceful, but insistent. In that silence, thoughts that were once fleeting become persistent. Emotions that were once softened by shared presence become sharper, more defined. There is no longer an external reference point to regulate or balance what arises internally. What was once diffused across two people is now concentrated within one. This concentration can feel overwhelming because it reveals how much of one's inner stability was intertwined with the presence of another. Without them, the familiar patterns begin to loosen. One may notice a dependency that was previously invisible, a reliance not only on the person themselves, but on what they represented: comfort, validation, understanding, or even escape. The absence strips away these supports, exposing the raw structure beneath them. In this exposure, contradictions emerge. One may feel both strong and fragile, independent yet deeply attached, clear in thought yet confused in emotion. These contradictions are not new. They were always there, but they were balanced or obscured by the dynamic of the relationship. Now, without that dynamic, they stand in direct opposition, demanding to be reconciled. This is the essence of inner confrontation, the meeting of parts of the self that have not yet been integrated. There is also a confrontation with truth. In the presence of another, it is easy to maintain certain narratives about who we are, what we need, what we believe. These narratives are often supported, or at least unchallenged, within the relationship. But absence removes that reinforcement. It forces a re-evaluation of those narratives, exposing where they were incomplete or constructed to avoid discomfort. One begins to question not only the relationship that was lost, but the assumptions that sustained it. This process can be resisted, One can attempt to avoid the confrontation by filling the silence with distractions, by seeking immediate replacements, or by clinging to idealized memories. But the underlying tension remains, because it is not caused by the absence itself, it is caused by what the absence reveals. The more one avoids it, the more persistent it becomes, appearing in moments of stillness, in unexpected emotions, in the quiet realization that something unresolved continues to exist beneath the surface. To face this confrontation is to turn inward, without the usual defenses. It requires acknowledging feelings that may be uncomfortable or contradictory, recognizing patterns that may not align with one's self-image, and accepting that the loss has exposed something unfinished within. This is not a process of quick resolution, but of gradual awareness, where each realization brings a deeper understanding of the self as it truly is, rather than as it was once experienced through another. What they search for after losing you often appears to be you in another form, another person, another situation that might restore what once felt whole. Yet beneath this search lies a misunderstanding so subtle that it easily escapes awareness. They believe that what they experienced came from you, that the depth, the warmth, the sense of meaning was something you carried and provided. But what they felt was not something given to them fully formed. It was something awakened within them through the encounter. Human experience is not a passive reception of what others bring. It is an active response, shaped by inner structures that determine how we perceive, feel, and assign meaning. When they were with you, something within them responded in a way it had not before. Certain emotions intensified, certain thoughts became clearer, certain parts of their identity emerged with a sense of authenticity. It felt as though you were the source of this transformation, but in truth you were the catalyst. The experience belonged to them, even if it was triggered by you. After the loss, the instinct is to recover that experience by external means. They may seek people who resemble you, who speak in similar ways, who evoke faint echoes of what once was. They may pursue situations that mimic the circumstances in which they felt most alive. This search is driven by memory, by the desire to return to a state that felt meaningful and complete. Yet each attempt carries a quiet disappointment, because what they encounter never fully matches what they remember. This disappointment is not a failure of the world to provide, but a failure to recognize where the experience originated. What they are trying to find outside themselves was never located entirely outside to begin with. It was a potential within them that was activated through connection, a dormant capacity that found expression in your presence. Without that understanding, the search becomes endless, moving from one substitute to another, always close but never quite reaching what was lost. The deeper challenge is to shift the direction of that search. Instead of looking outward for replication, they must begin to look inward for recognition. The qualities they associate with you, the depth of feeling, the openness, the sense of connection are not foreign elements that entered them from the outside. They are parts of their own psyche that were given space to emerge. To reclaim them requires awareness, not replacement. This process is neither immediate nor easy. It involves disentangling the memory of you from the experience of themselves. It requires seeing that what felt like something you gave them was in fact something they were capable of generating. This realization can be unsettling because it removes the comforting idea that what was lost can simply be found again through another person. It places responsibility back onto the individual, asking them to develop consciously what once arose unconsciously. As this awareness grows, the nature of the search begins to change. It becomes less about finding someone who can recreate the past, and more about understanding the conditions under which those inner experiences can exist. The focus shifts from dependency to integration, from longing to recognition. What once seemed like something rare and external begins to reveal itself as something internal, waiting not to be found elsewhere, but to be acknowledged and cultivated within. Loss is often experienced first as a wound, immediate and undeniable. It disrupts the familiar structure of life, creating a rupture that cannot be ignored or easily repaired. The mind instinctively resists it, trying to restore what has been broken, to return to a state that once felt stable and known. There is a sense of injustice in it, as though something essential has been taken without consent, leaving behind a disorientation that reaches into thought, emotion, and even the body itself. This wound is not only emotional, it is existential, touching the very framework through which one understands connection, meaning, and self. Yet beneath this surface of pain lies something less visible, but equally powerful. The wound does not remain passive. It exerts pressure, not only to be healed, but to be understood. It interrupts the automatic flow of life, and demands attention. What once moved unnoticed now becomes a point of focus. Patterns that were taken for granted begin to reveal themselves. Dependencies, expectations, and unexamined beliefs rise into awareness, not because one seeks them, but because the rupture has made them impossible to ignore. This is where the second aspect of loss begins to emerge, not as comfort, but as a kind of call. The pain itself becomes a signal, directing attention inward. It asks questions that cannot be answered superficially. Why did this loss affect me in this way? What did this connection represent beyond its visible form? What parts of myself were involved that I had not fully recognized? These questions do not arise out of curiosity alone, but out of necessity. The intensity of the wound demands a depth of response that goes beyond simple coping. This dual nature of loss creates tension. On one side, there is the desire to escape the pain, to close the wound as quickly as possible, to return to a state of emotional equilibrium. On the other side, there is an emerging awareness that the pain carries meaning, that it is pointing towards something that requires attention and integration. To follow this second path is not to prolong suffering unnecessarily, but to recognize that the wound has opened a space where something previously hidden can now be seen. In this sense, loss acts as an initiation. It marks a transition from one state of being to another, though the direction of that transition is not predetermined. An initiation does not guarantee growth. It only provides the opportunity for it. One can move through the experience without engaging its deeper implications, focusing only on recovery and restoration, or one can allow the experience to transform their understanding of themselves and their relationships, using the disruption as a means of becoming more conscious. The process of initiation is rarely clear or linear. It involves moments of regression as well as insight, periods of resistance followed by acceptance. The wound may seem to close at times, only to reopen in new ways, each time revealing a deeper layer of understanding. What initially appeared as pure pain begins to show complexity, containing not only what was lost, but what can be gained through awareness. To see loss only as a wound is to remain at the surface of the experience. To recognize it also as an initiation is to acknowledge that within the disruption lies the potential for transformation, a movement toward a more integrated and conscious relationship with oneself and the world. Growth, in its deeper sense, is not a matter of acquiring something new, but of reclaiming and integrating what has long existed in fragmented form. In the presence of another person, it is common for certain qualities within the self to be experienced indirectly. One may perceive strength in them, warmth in them, clarity in them, without recognizing that these perceptions are reflections of one's own latent capacities. The psyche, in its complexity, often projects what it does not fully possess consciously, placing it onto another where it can be encountered without the responsibility of ownership. This projection creates a powerful dynamic. It allows connection to feel meaningful and alive, but it also creates dependency. The qualities that seem to reside in the other person begin to feel essential, as though they are the source of what one lacks. As long as the connection remains, this arrangement can persist without disruption. There is no immediate need to question it, because the experience feels complete in itself. But when that person is no longer present, the projection collapses, and what was once perceived externally no longer has a place to reside. This collapse is often experienced as loss, not only of the person but of the qualities associated with them. It can feel as though something vital has been taken away, leaving behind a diminished version of oneself. Yet this perception is based on an incomplete understanding. What appears to be lost was never entirely external. It was part of the self, temporarily located outside through projection, now returning in an unrecognized and unintegrated form. The challenge that follows is not to replace what was lost, but to integrate what has been returned. Integration requires a shift from unconscious experience to conscious recognition. It involves seeing that the strength admired in the other is something one must now develop within. The warmth once received must now be cultivated internally. The clarity once found in their perspective must now emerge from one's own reflection. This is not a simple transfer, but a transformation that demands effort, awareness, and persistence. Resistance to this process is natural. It is easier to seek another person who can carry these qualities again, to re-establish the dynamic of projection rather than to undertake the work of integration. But such attempts rarely lead to lasting fulfillment because they recreate the same pattern without resolving its underlying structure. The sense of incompleteness remains, even if temporarily obscured by new connections. True growth begins when one accepts that what was projected must now be owned. This acceptance is not merely intellectual, it requires engagement with the self in a direct and often uncomfortable way. It means confronting areas of weakness, acknowledging dependencies, and developing capacities that were previously neglected. It is a process of becoming whole, not by adding something new, but by bringing together what was once divided. As integration progresses, the relationship to others begins to change. Connections are no longer based on unconscious projection, but on a more balanced exchange. One no longer seeks completion through another, but connection as an extension of an already developing sense of self. The qualities that once seemed to belong to someone else are now recognized as part of one's own inner structure, accessible without reliance on external presence. In this way, growth becomes inseparable from responsibility, the responsibility to recognize, develop, and embody what one once saw only in another, transforming loss into a process of becoming more complete within oneself.